This is your city. This is your city wants to know. We want to know the background, the heartbeat of what makes up our beautiful cities. We dig into the backstories, from the struggles to the successes of our local entrepreneurs, small business owners, artists, not-for-profit organizations, and the many, many people who make up the intricate tapestry of our communities. Real people, real stories, by you and for you.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another episode of This is Your City. A little bit different today than normally, where I have a guest and I'm interviewing a guest. And I'm hoping soon I can get a guest that's kind of related to my topic tonight. And this topic tonight it's quite serious, actually, and it's about what's happening in Afghanistan right now and the atrocities that are straight out of a horror film. I've heard different people commenting on things they've heard or little snippets that they've seen on TV or the news. And it truly makes me sad because these comments are showing a lot of ignorance. And it appears that many people don't really understand or have an idea of what's actually happening over there, what's happening in the world around us. And even sadder, even more sad, there are way too many people who don't care what's happening around the rest of the world. If it's not affecting them, if it doesn't interfere with their everyday life, they don't care. And that's sad because it's scary, really, because if we don't take notice, it'll soon come to us, because then it just creeps in and then it's too late. So I want to talk about Afghanistan and the Taliban. And I guess to start there, I have to explain who the Taliban are and how or why they became so powerful. Most of us have heard of the Taliban. I mean, the last decade or so, they've been front and center. But basically, they rose to power in 1994. And this was huge amount of turmoil, and it followed the withdrawal from the Soviet forces in Afghanistan. This was way back in 1989. And so what happened was the Soviet Union had invaded them in 1979. And what this was is to prop up the communist government in Afghanistan. They wanted to bring their communism there. And eventually they met their fate to the bigger powers of past and present, who have tried to impose their will on this country. And like most of these people that try to impose their will, they were driven out. And so after they were, the Russian Soviet Unions, I should say, was driven out, the country fell into warlordism and a brutal civil war. You know, we hear these words, warlordism and civil war, and we don't fathom the evil in it. And against this backdrop, the Taliban, with their promise to put Islamic values first and to battle the corruption that drove the warlords fighting, they quickly attracted a following. Many people, we heard this a couple decades ago, the following, they schooled them. They even forced them. But over months of intense fighting, they finally took over most of the country. And we've all seen the images of the tankers and the kids and the men with guns, and it's terrifying. And then in 1996, the Taliban declared an Islamic emirate, and they imposed a very harsh interpretation of the Quran and enforced brutal public punishments, including floggings, amputations, mass executions. We've all heard about them. You know, our local news stations, they just, they cover so much, and the propaganda is ridiculous. Don't think propaganda is just over in those countries. It's in North America too. But later on, it came out where there was live mass executions where the Taliban filmed them themselves and put it out there over social media. But the news companies, our big news places, wouldn't air it. Yet the Taliban was airing it. They would have squares and they would force the people of the villages to watch. And scary and frighteningly enough, a lot of the villagers agreed with these executions and amputations and floggings, you know, just to win the approval of the Taliban as well. And as we've all seen, mostly any other religion or religious sects that were not of the Muslim faith, those were the ones who were typically, sadly, succumb to these executions and floggings and amputations and brutal tortures. What's the scariest thing is what's happening to the women. What's happened to the woman, but it's even more so right now. Back then, you know, they curtailed all of the rule over the women. So they kept them out of schools. They weren't allowed to go to schools. They were nearly stripped of every human right and freedom. They couldn't drive anymore. If they were able to, they can't go to the healthcare services on their own. They couldn't travel anywhere unless they were accompanied by a male escort. And they suffered brutal punishment if they failed to comply with any of these really unrealistic demands. And they also made it very clear that rival religious practices would not be tolerated. This included, this is just to name a few, Buddhism, Mormons, Catholics, Christians, Jehovah's Witnesses, and even in some cases, Sikhism. Their warpath to annihilate anyone who did not bow to the Muslim religion, it was horrifying to say the least. And infidels of all kinds were to be eliminated from the face of the earth. We all remember hearing this. We all remember the word infidel. It was seared into our brains a few years back, right? And then that Sharia law was introduced again, and which is a code for living that all Muslims should adhere to. And it's introduced, and they just enforce it even more so. Even more, I don't even know, but then eventually the American coalition led, well, they stepped in and they eventually started gaining some ground, and the Taliban rulings of life began to subside. The Americans went in, they started to show, you know, women had rights, and they started all of these wonderful things. But, oh, and then also back then when the Americans stepped in, this is something that blows my mind. Like, there became a law against raping and stealing women and young girls. The fact that there even needed to be a law against that, and that's not that long ago. You know, and then of course we all remember 9/11. So it's been like a back and forth with the Taliban and Americans and the rest of the world, allies. And then 9/11 happened, and then we're just here today where we are again. All that ground that was made is being lost. And women are extremely fearful right now for their lives and what this means to them. That Taliban have taken control because the American troops have pulled out. You know, I guess it was Trump who agreed, because things were going well over there. And so Trump agreed, if it continues to go well, then he will pull out the troops in mid to late 2021. And here we are. We're in mid 2021. And Biden, he agreed to that. He kept it. He kept that, even though there was great proof that the Taliban were taking and gaining ground. And the Americans were pulled out during some of this atrociousness that's happening there now. And that just blows my mind. That just blows my mind. So the Taliban have now taken control. The American coalitions are gone, and ample signs of fear are taking place. Well-grounded fears, of course. And this week, just 9 days after the Taliban seized the first provincial capital, the insurgents walked into the capital, Kabul. They walked in and took rule over Afghanistan. I guess it's like over 40% of the country. And just one example, this is just one example. The Taliban fighters entered one of the largest banks in Kandahar, and this was in July, and ordered 9 women that were in that building that day who were working, ordered them to leave or face punishment. And then they said to them, you get your male relatives to come in here and take this job. And Reuters has reported that in the northern city of Kunduz this month, the city's new Taliban rulers ordered women who had worked for government positions to leave their jobs and never to return, with the threat of torture used to ensure that they comply. That's a lot of fear. And it would seem totally unfair and horrible, right? If we thought, okay, yeah, if that were the extent of it, okay, they're going in and taking away all the women's rights. Okay, that's horrible, but it's easy enough to lose as we get into the busyness of our own life. But that's not the extent of it. And it's even more horrifying than we can imagine, than we can think. There's many underground groups, and you can go do your own research. There's many underground groups and reporters, and even Reuters is reporting, and everybody knows who Reuters is. It's the global reporting. But anyway, go do your own research. Don't just take it from me of some of the atrocities. Many underground groups are sending information. With the World Wide Web now and texting and all of these forms of communication, it's getting out there, and they're sending information about the state of its people and trying to shed light on some truth, because there's so much propaganda going on that's being filtered through the world. So the actual citizens are getting together and they are sending information. And it's bone chilling. The latest is coming from Afghanistan is desperation that we cannot imagine. We've all heard the stories of late about the women and children. And I'll read you one excerpt from one of the underground communities that have gotten some of their information out. And these are true. It's not just propaganda. The facts checkers have checked it, and it comes out to be true. And this is just an insert I want to read to you. And it says, "Our people are on the move, running from house to house and city to city to avoid getting caught. Unfortunately, many Afghans are calling out the location of people in hiding to gain favor with the Taliban to save their own lives. It's fear. This situation is dire for our people, as they are witnessing women and girls being taken from their homes as prizes for the Taliban and being raped and tortured. The streets of Kabul are nearly empty. There are no women or girls around. Afghans are no longer wearing Western clothes, and leaders are being stopped at the borders by the Taliban. Pictures of women who are on hair salons or beauty salons or anywhere that there was pictures of women are being torn down. There are thousands of people inside the airport grounds attempting to get out." And I think we've all seen some of those images on the news. "Thousands more have flooded the outside gates, causing chaos on the ground. Many are being beaten and whipped and shot by the Taliban thugs, and even the ISIS killers are now joining ranks of the Taliban, ignoring their differences for now." Get this, "until all infidels are caught, tortured, and killed." They have names of people who have converted to Christianity and other minority religions and are aggressively searching them out. These people are not afraid to die, but want their children to live free. The resources are there. Courage is on a dramatic rise, and the will is strong. The chaos and evil have been waiting for this moment. That is terrifying. They are running to the hills. There are some newspaper clips that are talking about the people running to the hills and hiding in the rocks to not get caught. Fathers and husbands are going to great lengths to hide their daughters and their wives. More so daughters, because apparently some of the Taliban feel they have some sort of moral compass, and so they won't steal and rape married women who are following all of these rules. But young girls that seem to be of the age of 12 or higher and are unmarried, they're all fair game. Who seem to be of the age of 12 and older. So you can imagine that many more young girls under the age of 12, because that's the marrying age where they can force you to marry. Mothers and fathers are going through great lengths, mostly mothers in this instance, but fathers desperate as well, trying to disguise their daughters as boys, cutting their hair, trying desperately to make them seem undesirable. They're sending their children away from home to home, to town, with the understanding that if they get caught, it would mean their very lives. And many have already lost their very lives. Literally, they have had their children ripped from their arms and taken from them. Others have lost their lives in that moment of holding their children, refusing to give them over, so the Taliban just shoot them right there. This is horrifying. It's horrifying, and it has brought me to tears on numerous occasions when I'm thinking and praying for those people. And this is not something we should stand for. You know, as I mentioned back earlier, that the Taliban started this torture program, I guess you can call it a torture program, to dismantle any other religious sects. And they have decided on upping that plan now in this last month. They have decided to up those plans to decimate any other minority religion, especially Christians. Now, I guess in Afghanistan, their Christians are estimated to be anywhere from 10 to 12,000 people. However, it's very difficult to say this number, and they're saying that it's probably much larger population than that, but because they're all underground, it's hard to get those numbers. And they're saying that the vast majority of them are converts from the Islam religion to Christianity. And they have largely practiced, of course, their faith underground. They have to. The conversion is considered a crime punishable by death under Sharia law. So people in the Islam faith who are converting to Christianity are converting knowing that the chances that they are punished by death is very, very high. We in this country, in North America, and most other parts of the world, don't have to worry about choosing a faith and literally dying for it. But since the Taliban fall, originally in 2001, it is reported that the Christian minority, I guess, and the minority religions are actually growing. The part because of I guess there was some security lent by the US coalition and forces when they were there on the ground. So it grew because they didn't necessarily have to go underground. And in 2019, as the number of children born to converts grew, dozens of Afghan Christians decided to include their religion affiliation on their national identity cards. So when they had children, they put Christian on their identity cards so that their future generations wouldn't have to hide in fear. And that took a lot of courage, because to be able to do that means you can be hunted down. And right now, only about 30 Christians successfully made this change to their identity cards before the Taliban took over last week. So this is recent. This isn't, decades ago. This is happening today. The US is being highly criticized for withdrawing out of Afghanistan and leaving these minorities no choice but to be, they cooperate with the US and Afghan government in attempt to hide, to be hidden. Because as you can well imagine, the memories of public executions and floggings and amputations and Christians being lined up in a row and with their throats being cut or killed execution style is very, very vivid in their minds. And not just Christians, I should say, but any religious minority. We've all seen some of the videos where they were executed live. And this is still vivid in their imaginations, in their minds. And It's reported that the Taliban is working diligently. They are actually taking people off the street and threatening them, and they're making them their thugs to do some of their work. And they are working diligently to track down known Christians on this list that they have. You know, some church leaders are sending their communities, telling them to stay in their homes, don't come out, you know, even though they know that the long term is that they have to flee this country. They have to flee this country if they want to take their lives, if they want to keep their lives. They're escaping into the hills. I don't know about you guys, if you don't know scripture, well, this is a prominent scripture about heading to the hills and to the rocks. You know, some Christians on the ground have expressed that the takeover of Kabul, they've expected, and they do expect to be killed, mafia style. And some reports, in some of the news reports that you can do your research, they're saying that the Taliban is already conducting targeted killing on minority religions and any people of not the Muslim faith. If they catch anybody who is not practicing the Muslim faith on public transportation, they execute them. And if anybody is caught with any sort of Bible software on their cell phones, their lives are being threatened. And if they're tracked down, we know they'll be killed. And a lot of these Christians, they fear for the safety of their children. They're already publicizing to eradicate the ignorance of religion by taking non-Muslim women and girls as sex slaves and forcing their boys as soldiers. I mean, we can't imagine that here. We can't imagine that here. I mean, put your heart there. These families, these parents, these mothers and fathers, you know, their children, even if they're not a minority in a different religion, the Taliban are stealing their daughters and forcing their sons to become soldiers. And we've already, most of us anyway, we already know what happens when they force the young boys into being soldiers. Again, you can do your research. Yes, they inject them full of all these drugs and get them kind of hooked, and then that's how they keep them. Oh my gosh, it's terrible. And it's amazing how we in this part of the world don't even recognize that half of this stuff goes on. And there's no clear plan from, you know, the US coalitions of going and rescuing these people under threat. You know, every country, Germany, Greece, oh my gosh, so many different countries are taking steps to allow certain papers and different Afghanistanians under threat to come into the country. But the thing is, they have to have a passport. And most women, if they have a passport at all, it's being taken away from them. They're stuck. They have no choice. They are not going anywhere without a passport. And a lot of their own family members are doing this, taking away their passports and giving it to the Taliban for thinking, maybe, who knows what they're thinking, but maybe if I can, you know, just stay with them and give them what they need, they'll let us live. We don't know what they're thinking. I can't imagine it, but I've never been in that situation. And the Taliban's already sending threatening letters or phone calls to places where they know that there is a minority religion, where there's Christians. They're threatening them. We know where you are, and we know what you're doing. And because people don't really know the sophistication of the Taliban's tracking capabilities, they're now turning off their cell phones so that they can avoid surveillance, and have started moving to underground locations. So I don't know. What I'm asking you, whether you're a believer, you're a non-believer, you know, it doesn't matter in a sense that this is happening. This could be your family that decided to go on a trip somewhere and they're stuck now, especially women. What if your sister, your mother, aunt, doesn't matter, went on a trip, let's just say, and now they're being forced as sex slaves. They're being ripped from their parents' arms. They're being shot down in the streets like dogs. We have to do something. I don't know what that something is. The only power I have is prayer. And so I will pray. I will pray that I will pray for these families who are losing their children, who are their wives, their sisters, their daughters, doesn't matter, who are being stolen and raped and tortured, and their sons being forced into the soldiers. I will pray for them. I will pray somehow that this shield of protection come over them. And those who have already been taken, I pray desperately that they will come out of this and that they will come out of this and be able to live a normal life. I am praying desperately that the Taliban be overtaken. The Lord intervene. We need to pray, folks. We need to have them in our hearts and in our minds. If you're not a prayer, what can you do to help? I don't know, but there's got to be something. Because they're not staying over in Afghanistan. You understand this? The Taliban are not staying over in Afghanistan. Their whole plan is to take over the world and eradicate all infidels. And in the end, when the minorities are taken care of, then they will go after the Muslims who do not follow Sharia law. And there are some Muslims, I know some, and I'm sure you know some, who have that fear, who know that if they don't agree with what's happening, they too will risk their lives being taken. Because if you don't, even if you proclaim the Muslim faith, but you don't follow what they're doing, you're considered an infidel. After all of the rest of the people are taken care of. So this podcast is to raise awareness. There are so many atrocities happening in so many places around the world that we don't hear about, or the propaganda does not allow us to hear the full stories. But we always end up getting it because there are always remnants, there are always people underground getting it out to us. Do your research. Don't just depend on what I'm telling you to be truth, but I'm telling you what I'm telling you is true. So that's that for This Is Your City. And I do ask you to share this podcast, this video, if you're watching the audio part of it. I do ask you to share it. Get it out there. Get people aware of what's happening. Don't let it just stay in your mind of something you've read or heard and go about your day as if nothing has happened. Because if it's not the Taliban, it'll be something else that will take your freedom if we don't stand for something. We've all heard the adage, if you don't stand for something, you will fall for everything. So just share it. Subscribe, follow, all of those things. Get this message out that people need to be aware of what's happening around the world. The more people that know, the more power the people have. And we've already seen the Taliban can be beaten. They can be beaten, and they will be. But we need to stop them before they continue with more carnage. Thank you for tuning in. And I look forward to having you tune in next week when we have more guests for This Is Your City. Ciao. Stay safe and stay blessed.